And good evening, everybody out there. It is another Sunday night, and that means it's time for Talking TSR. This is episode 22. I cannot believe this is our 22nd episode already. Good evening to everybody out there. My name is Chris. I will be one of your co-hosts, and along with me, as always, to my virtual left is Rick. Hey, Rick, how's it going?
How are you doing, my friend? Did you survive all the flooding in your area? That's the question.
More or less, yes. For those folks seeing on the internet, I live right smack dab in the center of New Jersey, and a couple of miles over was a disaster area. I did get my game room basically ruined with my wall-to-wall carpet and all my bookcases and everything, but no games and no books were damaged thanks to some timely running things up the steps at night. We saved all that stuff. But yeah, the last 2 weeks has been kind of cleanup and getting everything all situated. So I am down a game room now. So the dining room is now the game room. And that's going to take a while to get that all back together. However, all safe and everything, considering everything that went through for folks that are out there that are not in the New Jersey area. New Jersey got slammed pretty bad. There were some pretty graphic pictures out there and the stories that are still kind of coming in. So, but yeah, so how did you fare? You didn't fare as bad as I did, I don't think.
No, I fared fairly well, and I'm glad at least to hear that, you and yours are safe. That's obviously the main thing, but I'll have to get that game room of yours running soon. I've been through the flooding route, and this last year, the weather has been very extreme in New Jersey. We're really not part and parcel to a lot of the crazy weather that goes on in much of the rest of the country. So this is kind of, new stuff for us. And
Yeah.
this is the wave of the future, I guess. But yeah, the important thing is that, folks are safe. So, but
Yeah, this is we've had four storms of the century in the last 20 years. So it's
yeah,
it's usually it's a storm of the every half decade now.
yeah,
So yeah, so sadly. But anyway, we're here to talk an awesome
yeah,
classic module, module A1, Slave Pits of the Undercity, the very beginning of the Slave Lord series. This is one of my favorite modules. Didn't make my top 10 because I think I like another one of the slaver modules. You'll have to stay tuned to see which one I like better. But this one is always up there. It's classic. I remember so many of these encounters. And we're going to talk about this module quite a bit tonight. And then later on, we're going to present our top 5 list of favorite encounters, because there's some really good,
yeah.
intriguing encounters in this module. And I think that's basically kind of a hallmark for it. Thank you. Shade of Icarus has already thrown a comment out there congratulating us on the final release of Temple of Elemental Evil. Thank you guys all for that. Yes, finally the books have arrived. They are getting in people's hands literally as we speak. We did an unboxing show a couple of nights ago. That's on YouTube now. Make sure you guys check that out if you missed it on our Twitch channel. And also there was a live stream earlier today where one of our playtesters, the awesome Micah, ran his group through one of the nodes. I don't even know which node it is. I can't wait to watch the episode. I've been busy cleaning up my basement, and I haven't had time to sit back and watch some of these awesome shows. So yeah, so thanks for the congrats on that. And we are looking forward to you guys getting those in your hands and seeing what you guys think about it. So
Yeah. It was a
um,
long road, as we say sometimes, to get to this
yeah.
point, 2 years plus. I think a little longer for you than for me, but it was about 2 years.
Yeah.
We're as
It's
excited to see it hit print and, actually get in people's hands, because until that happens, it's like a play before an empty house. So it's like we really want to get that feedback. We love it.
Yeah, and then you think about all the projects that you've done since then, and that you're already on. And I say
Yeah.
you're on like the third one, I think now, or the second one, or
Yeah.
something like that. Since then, so it's like, yeah,
It's funny.
yeah,
I said to somebody recently that, I think when you do game design, just out of necessity, you get in this habit of being in the moment, in the project of the moment.
yep,
You're not really thinking about when you're going to see the last thing you did, because that might have been 12 months or 16 months ago. You're kind of busy writing what you're doing right now. But in the case of Temple of Elemental Evil, it was such a special thing that, even for us, it really was
yeah,
something extraordinary. So very
yeah.
exciting.
Yeah, I totally agree. And now that I'm doing this more now, I have even more projects going on. I have numerous projects kind of bouncing around in my head right now. So it's like, yeah, it is nice to actually take a breath back, and because I really haven't touched Temple of Elemental Evil since like March. So it was definitely nice to do that. I see we already got some nice comments going there. Oh yeah, Canadian retails, I have no idea. Literally the game, the Temple of Elemental Evil arrived at the warehouse just under 2 weeks ago. And we've started shipping them out right away. So if you pre-ordered, that's what we're shipping out first. So all the pre-orders are going out first, then it's going out to distributors next. And I believe pre-orders is getting close to finishing up, and then it's going to be going out to stores after that. So yeah, wow, it's like blowing up. Yep. Awesome. All right, cool. So we're all caught up on chat already. So just wanted to make sure that. So let's jump in. So Rick,
Yeah,
give me let's just start with some overall impressions on this yet another classic module.
sure. And this one truly is another classic. You know, love the module, love the author. I think it's a perfect size adventure. To me, it hits that real sweet spot of like 2 to 3 sessions, which, you know, especially back in the old days was a good thing. But now that time is of an economy, it's still a good size, and it's shocking how well it holds up. You know, this is something that came out in, I think it was 1980. So we're looking at something that's 40 years old, 41 years old, and holds up remarkably well. Love the map design, love the emphasis on environment. There's just lots of good details, lots of really cool encounters, you know, where they didn't take the easy way out and just throw a bunch of orcs in a room, but they gave us that extra something, you know, the extra level of tactics or trap or environmental factors, which I love. So yeah, all around, I think one of the stronger entries of the Slaver series, and a great start to a Slaver, you know, to the
Yeah.
Slaver series.
Definitely. Yeah, interesting you mentioned about the size of it. So I actually took a look at that. There's exactly 40 encounters in this, and it's a 30, is it a 32-page module or is it 28? It is oh wow, actually it's only a 24-page module. But 40 encounters, not long. Just to compare that, B2, Keep on the Borderlands, between the Keep and the Caves of Chaos had 95 or 96 or something like that. You know, I think it was 95 encounters total. So definitely, you know, over half, you know, of the encounters. But as we're going to talk about a little bit later, the detail in the encounters were great. First of all, read aloud text in all of the in all of the encounters, and probably one of the earlier modules that had read aloud text in every single encounter. I've always been a little bit frustrated in doing some of the conversions like Temple of Elemental Evil, and that where it was inconsistent. Many of the rooms would have read out text and some wouldn't. And then you're like, is this just not an important encounter? What's the deal here? So that's important. And looking back, and we're going to talk about the tournament side of this module, but I can see that's why they did the read aloud text, because this was a tournament module, and the tournament philosophy comes very strong through this one. So I love the fact that you're getting a lot you're not getting as many encounters as normal, but you're not just getting, there's, you know, 6 orcs in this room and they're guarding a sack with 500 GP in it. You know, you're getting rooms, like you said, with tactics, some interesting environments going on, and interesting creatures and interesting dynamics. So definitely a little bit different there.
Yeah. So give me some of your high level impressions beyond that, or design philosophy notes.
Yeah, so I think I was really fascinated with the fact that this was a tournament module, and this is one of the ones when you read S4, or if you even read S1, it's not, you know, if they didn't tell you it was a tournament module before, you know, in the intro and everything, you wouldn't necessarily get that. These modules, it's very clear because they actually delineate out, they actually cut off, and there's actually maps in the back. Actually, we can throw the maps up actually on there, where you can see there are 2 sets of maps. There's the overall map, kind of the campaign map that has all of the encounters, but then there's the tournament maps, which actually only have about half of the encounters. I think it was like 8 or 9 rooms, I think it was. So that was very interesting that they did that, and a little bit confusing when you're picking this module up when you were a kid and you're like, hey, what's going on? Tournament campaign? I don't really get that. So but definitely a very nice balance of of encounters, and I think the tournament part was probably my favorite part of it, and it definitely heavily influenced me in some of the earlier tournaments that we did for Goodman Games back in the third edition era on how we scored them, and
Mhm.
everything. So what do you think about the tournament?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Obviously because of the crux of time and various factors in tournament, they tend to hone it down to the important rooms, to central rooms, and seeing with modules like this A1 and C1 and the various modules that came out of tournaments where they included some sort of scoring, for me, it was always fascinating seeing how they did that. It always reflected on my play of the module, even if I didn't run it as a sort of tournament. And there were times I ran this and actually did the scoring for fun
Oh,
or for
nice.
some reason. Yeah, not like a hardcore tournament, but just,
Yeah.
to let the players see what would happen. And it taught me about brevity of design and some things. So I think, as I mentioned to you too before the show, I really realized that a lot of my favorite modules, and I know I say I like them all, but the ones I really that are in that top 10, a lot of them are tournament modules for
Yeah.
whatever reason. It just seems like, maybe because they were refined after the fact, or I don't know, but for something that they might have just taken because it was available and made it into a print product, I found that, like I said, an unusual amount of the modules I really truly love are tournament modules. So I
Yeah.
don't know
It,
why that is. I just know that it is.
Yeah,
So
and it's interesting back then in the late 70s and the early 80s, apparently at TSR, they just needed products to come out and they looked around and they were like, oh, look, we did all this work for these tournaments at conventions. Let's just kind of reskin them and add some campaign parts and
yeah.
publish it. So apparently, so there was in 2013, I think it was, there was Against the Slave Lords, which was reprinted. So that was back in the believe that was in the nether time where they announced that fifth edition was being worked on, but they weren't really putting out fourth edition books. But of course, if you're a publisher, you got to still be putting books out. So
Mhm.
they reprinted, I believe, the first edition books, the second edition books. I think they even did reprints of the third edition books, I
Hmm.
think. But they also did some of the classic modules and they combined them
Hmm.
together. I think they did the S modules. I think they put all
Mhm.
those together in a hardcover. And they did that for the Slave Lord series. Now again, there was two. There was a soft covered
Yeah.
compilation called Scourge of the Slave Lords, and
Version
we're
of
going
the
to get
slave
to that
lords.
later in our
Yeah.
series.
Yeah.
That is the super module, just like
Mhm.
T1 through 4 was the super module, and actually T1 through 4 was designed where you play that first, Temple of Elemental Evil. Then they tweaked the Slaver series, they upped it, made it a little bit more challenging in between stuff so that you could play that from level 7 to 11, and
Yeah.
then from the Slavers you could go on to the Giants in the Drow series.
Mhm.
So I thought that that was interesting in the Against the Slave Lords, the reprint. They actually commissioned Skip Williams to write a module A0,
Mm.
which was interesting. They basically wanted a level 1 through 3 slaver module, and
Hmm.
he did that. But there was some great. They got each of the original authors had them write a foreword basically to the book, and it was fascinating to hear about the design philosophy and also some of the behind the scenes things that were going on when these modules are being used. And this is going to blow your mind, but when they ran this at Gen Con, I think it was Gen Con, it might have been Origins, but I think it was Gen Con. So they originally set the tournament up where and this is, keep in mind, this is before social media and before cell phones and everything, but they were worried about the teams. It was competitive, talking about round
Mhm.
one. Obviously there was like 100 teams played round one, and then only a few played round two and round three. So in the A modules, they actually had 5 level 1s, five first rounds basically, and that was 2 parts of A1, 2 parts of A2, and the first part of A3. I think that's how it went. I'm
Mm.
not sure. No, I might be getting that wrong. But anyway, there was 5 first rounds, and then there was a semifinal round, and then there was the final round. So there's
Mm.
really 7 parts to the whole series in the tournament. But this is fascinating. So after you played round ones, they had the module for sale on site apparently at Gen Con. Like, so they ran the entry rounds
Mhm.
on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday apparently. And then apparently it said that you could go buy them, or at least the plan was that you could go buy them on the convention floor. think it was David Cook's forward who mentioned that. It might have been Harold Johnson. I'm not sure which one. But anyway, that's fascinating. That's absolutely fascinating that you could play in a tournament and then literally like the next day go and buy it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that helped their sales out a lot.
Oh
So
yeah.
it's fascinating.
I'd
So
love to do that as a player if I was participating in a
yeah,
in a tournament. It's big up later. Um, but yeah, I think born of a lot of that tournament stuff, we started to see the beginnings of changes in these modules. I really feel like the standardization of the read aloud text
mhm,
really started getting things where we got to see a presentation of certain things in a certain order. And it's a sort of stuff that when a DM reads an encounter now, we don't even think about it. We just think, well, that's, we think of the monsters before the treasure or this or that.
mhm,
And as we all know, the very early modules was very much the Wild West. You get things all jumbled together, and especially with these really first initial modules, you have to kind of go through and sift through everything. So this was another module that impressed me as to how well organized it was for the time it came out. Some really cool stuff in there. I love the detailed humanoid tactics notes in the
mhm.
beginning, a lot of notes about reinforcements and that kind of thing. There's this sort of wandering monster roster, if we can put that up, that I thought was really cool because it gives you literally the numbers, and it kind of, lets you know that, as a DM, you can bring in so many orcs or so many critters as a wandering monster, but up to a certain point, and they give you the numbers, then they'll run out, then there are no more. And they even give you those sort of notes where if they're depleted via wandering monsters up to a point, then this room will have less. And I think that's just terrific. Um, just big strides toward ecology that we had not seen as much before this. So to me, kind of groundbreaking stuff, again, for 1980,
Yeah,
just, such a good, I would buy this module today. I would,
yeah,
if Wizards sold something of this nature for fifth edition, I would buy it in a heartbeat and not even think twice. So
yeah. And G Blaster put a comment out there saying any reports of players buying the module halfway through the con and then using it for the tournament. Well, apparently, again, and if they did this, they wouldn't actually release the tournament until after that round was done. But think about it. You're going through a team tournament. Part of the team tournament is how you succeed and get through the challenge. If the scoring system, there's the scoring system, folks. The scoring system was how many PCs survived and how many rooms did you get through. And then there was some additional scoring. You got there was a grid. There was a base number of points for that, basically. And then there was some bonus points for if you did some good tactics and things like that. So if you knew what the encounters were, if you knew some of the things you could prepare ahead of time, you could beat the module. Without a doubt. We had this issue when our own DCC tournament started getting really popular. Cheating became an issue. We had to be cognizant about making sure that tables that were going on at the same time or in the same room were not right next to each other, so that people didn't hear, oh, they're fighting the ogre right over there. Then ogre's coming up next. So it's definitely an issue. But you could also imagine if there's 5 first rounds, and of course they didn't tell anybody there was 5 first rounds. So you can imagine people at the bar. Back then it was Milwaukee, at the Park Place, I think it was, or the I forget what some of the hotels were. The Ramada Inn. I remember the Ramada Inn actually. So it's like you can imagine you're sitting there explaining somebody how your round went, and then they're like, "Wait, orcs? There were no orcs in our round." It's like we had all gnolls, and then you can imagine the confusion that would cause, and that was all by design. And
yeah.
and that was really the, and we did the very same thing. Eventually, we started doing that with our DCC tournament where we designed one of the modules. I think it was Chronicle of the Fiend, but I might be wrong. Where there was 3 different entrances into the dungeon,
Mhm.
and they were all balanced the same way.
Mhm.
And then one table was assigned A, another table was assigned B, and then the C. And then it was the challenges were all the same. It's actually a little bit easier to do it in third edition because of the challenge rating system.
Mhm.
And then the treasure was the same. It was just, you just how you got there was a little bit differently. So
Yeah.
it was fascinating. So the way that their design philosophy for the whole slaver modules were, you had a featured humanoid. Okay, so it was orcs in A1. It was goblins and hobgoblins in A2, I believe. And then so you would have an encounter with the featured humanoid. you would have a basic monster encounter, apparently just fight
Mhm.
whatever the monster is. You would have a monster encounter with a trap. So you had that added addition there. You would have a trick encounter. So that was something that it wasn't necessarily a trap, but it was an obstacle you kind of had to get over. There was always at least one new monster. And already in 1980, they were already seeing people were memorizing the monster manual. And the monster manual came out and was it 77 or 78? So
Yeah.
already 2 years later, and already people were memorizing the monsters. Then there was a month. Then there was a counter that was called the dilemma encounter, and this was an encounter that could cause damage, but if you did good playing, you could avoid taking the damage. And then you had the boss encounter, and that was basically it. And then there was probably a couple of other fluff encounters in there here or there, but that was the marching orders that each writer got.
Hmm.
And then they were set off, and then they selected what their humanoids were, and then they're like, "Here, go create something. Here, you go create something." And then that way, everything was quote unquote balanced, so that
Mhm.
Team A got about the same balance that Team B did. Let's see, pretty amazing thinking about this all happened in the late 70s, early 80s. So
And that's an amazing list from a design standpoint, just even for the writers today to follow that sort of list, just to break things up and keep things, a variety of encounters. Such a good list. All the food groups are there. So,
yeah, certainly. And that scoring system is what we used for the basis of our DCC scoring system, and Crypt of the Devil Lich, the Kickstarter we did a few months ago. Very similar. You got points for the number of rooms that you successfully encountered. You lost points if PCs died. We did that a little differently, but then there was a whole list, a menu, if you will, of all these things where you get extra points for if you,
yeah.
if you disable the trap, and if you don't set the trap off ahead of time, and then you bypass the trap, or use the trap against the monster or something like that, you would be rewarded for that during play. So this is where we were inspired by these things 40 years ago, and we're still using them today. And like you say, it holds up. And you said you would buy this module. Well, I guess you could say we've been doing this for the last, we started doing this with the DCC tournaments, and people loved it. People
Yeah.
loved the feel of doing a tournament that way.
Mhm.
So it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, the DCC tournaments only got bigger and bigger,
Yeah,
so they certainly ballooned to an incredible rate. So,
exactly. So, and I guess another thing I thought that was kind of interesting with this module, and we talked about this with Temple of Elemental Evil from the opposite side, but not a crazy ton of treasure in this module.
no.
Clearly that was not the focus of the tournament. Gaining treasure didn't get you any points.
Mhm.
But and there was some treasure in some of the rooms that made sense and everything,
Yeah.
but not like you saw in
No.
Temple of Mental Evil, where you'd have a first level of a dungeon, and there was 10,000 GP worth of stuff and everything. Very interesting that treasure was almost downplayed
Mhm.
in
Yeah.
these tournament, and it was really more about the trying to beat the encounter.
Yeah. Definitely. I guess as my way of final thoughts, maybe before we start digging into our top five, I'm trying to think what else is as I mentioned before, I love the atmosphere. I've mentioned the atmosphere environment so many times because I feel it's so important. But this temple where this takes place, it's so infused where you have the upper burned level and you have the lower, kind of sewer level. And there's so many rooms that are either collapsing or kind of look like they're held together with baling wire and tape, and they're flooded, and they're different kind of crumbling environmental hazards or ruins. And it's pervasive throughout this module that you absolutely have a sense of where you are, especially on the lower level. To me, it is, you're always thinking about, that you're near this place of water and all this stuff going on. And I love that. um I love the maps. If we could get the maps up there, yeah, that's great. um I have like a sort of love-hate relationship with these maps because I found them, they required a careful eye, because to this day I still find elements of these maps confusing, even though I love the design. On the upper level, I'm still not 100% sure all the access points to that central courtyard where the basilisks are. Do you can only go through the wall, or is there another way to get in there? I don't know. And then there's an area in the lower level, where you have that sort of two-level situation near the slave pits,
Yeah.
that it requires a real careful look at the map by the DM for them to understand, I think, what's going on. It's not an easily digestible map at first glance.
Yeah.
But that said, I think it's a gorgeous map. And it's sad because after this, I think really during second edition, we got into that point where we got some kind of really boring maps in some of these modules where you just get a bunch of oval caves and there were just not a lot of personality. Where I think one of the reasons I like this module is the dungeon has real personality, both above and below, and both levels feel distinctive. So it's you feel that sense of factions too, where you kind of feel like, well, this is the orc area, this is the Aspis area, and this is the slave lords area. There's a sort of delineation of creature types there too. So there's just so much going on that I like in this.
Yeah. And this is unusual, but the setting is in a city. It's in a city. It's in a city that once was a normal city that's been overrun by the forces of chaos. So basically, you have kind of like the caves of chaos, but it's in a city now. And it's a real rough and tumble area in that, and so that it's kind of unusual that the entrance to a dungeon is in the middle of the city. Now, they did say it was kind of on the outskirts of the city. They made it so that it was a little bit, you didn't have to go into the downtown of the city to get to it. But I thought that was fascinating too. That was different. That was very different, and we're gonna see as we proceed through these 4 modules how they use the different environments to their advantage, where again, it wasn't like, okay, another set of caves, okay, another set of, we're doing the same thing again. Nope, it was different. It was a lot of different everything. You mentioned the Aspis. So we have two new critters. The Aspis get a lot of attention. I think those are the primary new monster in here. Basically, they're weevils. They're humanoid like weevils. There's drones which wield swords on the cover right there. You can see behind my shoulder. You're attacking some in the mine shaft. And then there was the cow, or the big queen, if you will. And then there was the larvae, which were aquatic versions, everything. And then there was the giant sundew. And the giant sundew never got its due, in my opinion. But very fascinating that, based off of a real creature. Most people probably realize that sundews they do happen, but let me just drop on some scientific facts on you. Sundews, the largest genera of the carnivorous plants out there. It's family Drosera, about 200 different species, and they all have sticky glands or some kind of sticky parts where insects get stuck in them. So you can just see instantly where if you make a giant one of those, PCs can get stuck on them, and that was what the gist was. And one of those encounters was important to that. Actually, if we can throw up the picture of the sundew, there is a picture showing that off. So that was our new monsters that were in here. So before we get to our top 5,
and I don't think, did the Aspis ever show up anywhere else after this module?
I do not think so, which is pretty surprising, actually.
Yeah, because they were fairly well developed. I mean, they always had that Gamma World sort of feel, perhaps, as a race to me. And maybe, I don't know, maybe that hurt them. But I always thought it was a very cool race that should have deserved an encore appearance someplace, and never got it.
Yeah. Were they even in the Monster Manual Volume 2? I don't even know if they even made that.
I'm going to say no. I'm fairly
Yeah.
certain they do not appear in there. So,
Yeah. All right. If I wasn't doing a live show right now, I'd go check. But
yeah.
Anyway,
they got the short.
I'll check out.
And if I'm wrong, somebody in the comments tell me.
But yeah, it's true though, which is
So-
pretty surprising actually that they never really made it another module. Kind of gives me an idea or two. Maybe that needs to be fixed. So in some way.
Could be a
So
future product there.
exactly. So all right. So we're gonna do a top 5 list like we always do. We're gonna jump back and forth. And we're going to these are going to be our favorite encounters, or interesting encounters, if you will. And we're going to actually do encounters. There are so many really good encounters in this module that it was actually kind of hard, in my opinion, when I was going through them. I could have easily probably found 3 or 4 more without even doing much work to come up with anything new and everything. So I have 5, and I have an honorable mention. We can do the honorable mentions at the end. So do you want to go first, or who wants to go? I can't remember who went first last time.
I don't care. I don't know.
Okay. I'll go first.
Go for it.
Let's do that.
And
Okay.
we'll see how many crossovers. If
We will
any.
see. I'm sure there's going to be some
I,
crossover because
me too.
there's some really good classic encounters in here.
There's
So
one room that if we don't cross over, I will be very surprised.
yeah,
But
it'll probably be the first time we
that's always
cross
part of
over.
the
So
fun of it. We don't know each other's lists, folks. So
yep. So this is all kind of new to us right now. So.
What Chris is naming as his favorites is the first I've heard it. This is you. So
okay, so my number 5 favorite encounter in A1 Slave Pits of the Undercity, Area 8 in the upper level, the cemetery. So love the cemetery. The first part about the cemetery, so it is literally there's a cemetery, but it's kind of an overgrown garden, more or less. And there's a couple of paths through it. And what's really cool about it is they actually give you a little bit of a hint on what this place was before the humanoids moved in and ransacked and burned out the place, everything. They say that there was a nature goddess that this temple was dedicated to, and she is kind of fighting back a little bit in this cemetery garden area, to the point that the orcs in the nearby room in area 7 are like terrified because every time they go through this area, like the plants grab at them. There's a neat little table of anytime you go to walk through, something will happen. And again, it's not necessarily there's some things that hurt, like a tree could fall on you and it does some serious damage, but a bush could pickpocket you and maybe take your wand or take your spell components or something. The path can simply be blocked. You can get entangled. Fascinating. I love when there's little tables of different things like this. Obviously fascinating if you're specifically destructive in this area. The trees will animate and 3 trees will block each exit, and they're basically like treants, and you guys are only like 4th through 7th level. You could probably barely take 1 tree down. You're not taking 3 down.
Now those trees, folks, are what is this for levels 4 to 7?
4 to 7.
Yeah, so these are 10 hit die trees.
Yep.
They attack 4 times per round, and I think it says 2 or 3 block each door.
Yes, 3 block each door.
You can really get in trouble if you're destructive.
Yep. You can see why the orcs and everything are afraid now.
Yeah.
So it was really cool that it tied in with some of the other encounters near it, and you got that little bit of backstory. And then to top it all off, there's a crypt in the middle. You'd have to actually leave the path and go in and find the crypt. But if you do, and you open up the door and go inside, there is a stairway that will bring you all the way to the boss fight, which is insane. I probably wouldn't have done that. I probably would have brought you down there where you could have skipped over a lot of things. Maybe I wouldn't have brought you literally to the, and not only does it bring you to the boss fight, brings you from like behind where you could actually get the drop on the boss and kind of nullify that encounter a little bit. So I'm not sure I would have done that as a designer, but fascinating though that
I agree. Well, first off, I love this area, but I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying about the map, because scrutinizing the lower level. Now, I do believe, like you, that I think this particular passage downward, because it requires a little extra risk and a little extra investigation, so it certainly, it should be a gainful one. But yeah, there's actually not one, but there's kind of 2 downward, areas that can deposit people right near the boss room.
Yeah.
And then the other path that goes kind of toward the boss room that goes through the slave pits that the book is named for, it's kind of hidden behind a secret passage. So it's a little weird the way. I'm not thrilled with the way the lower levels set up, as far as, you can really kind of skip a whole lot of stuff almost, and the players could accidentally go down and almost immediately run into the final room. So that I wish was a little different. But again, also, I love that lower level. I love the look of it, but I just think the flow of the passages, I would tweak a few things if I was running this. But
to be fair, most players are not going to just defeat the boss and be done with it, because the boss actually didn't have any clues to get you to the next adventure.
No,
that was actually in a different encounter area. So you could get the boss and defeat him and then still not know who's up to this and everything, outside of this one guy who's,
because it's a map, right? There's a map in one of the
there's a
rooms.
map, but it's a different encounter that basically will lead you to A2 essentially. So anyway, a long-winded way of saying my favorite number 5 area is area 8, the cemetery.
Nice. All right, my number 5 is kind of next number over. Area 9, the ledge trap. Somehow I always think one of my first picks for these top 5 always seems to be one of these fiendish little traps. But I like this. Again, it makes great use of the environment. There are some clues perhaps that the trap is there. And then without running into any monsters whatsoever, the characters could really get in a distressful situation where, they have to fight drowning and current and being pulled under by their equipment and all that kind of thing. And as my players know, I'm a big fan of dumping them into water with their equipment at every opportunity. So I have a soft spot for this particular trap. So that's my short entry there. Number 5, my number 5 is the ledge trap.
Okay, and it's not just water; it's sewage, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, which is
They
even
actually
better.
talk about a collection of garbage that's sort of pooling where the players, so they literally dumped into, sewage water and a pile of garbage floating on top of it. So it's not pleasant at all.
No, not at all. Okay, so my number 4, this is actually in the lower part of the dungeon. This is area 12. And we actually have a picture for this one. So if Elena could pop that up, this is the orc tactic picture. So this is the orc and ogre outpost. So this is cool. So I love this encounter because of the tactics. The tactics are amazing here. So you have 3 ogres and 18 orcs. First of all, 3 ogres and 18 orcs. That is a pretty tricky fight for 4th to 7th level characters. Now, mind you, there's 9. I think there's 9 characters, so that does make a difference. So, but this is cool. So the orcs will split up into a squad of 6 orcs and 2 ogres, and they will actually position themselves on the stairs, and that's what the picture is basically showing. The bottom rank of orcs have hand axes, and they're the fighty ones. And then the 2 ranks beyond that are the crossbowmen, and so they are set up perfectly where they can shoot their crossbows over the heads of the ones in front, so you can easily hand wave you're not shooting through an ally because they have some elevation. And then at the very top behind them, the ogres, I guess, have learned how to throw rocks. The rocks don't do a whole lot of damage, but the ogres have rocks. They hurl rocks over at you. And then there's other orcs, I guess, kind of hanging back. As you eliminate the hand axe wielding orcs at the bottom, they will replace themselves because the crossbowmen also have hand axes and they'll step down. So you can see it, definitely a choke point here, hard for the characters to kind of get through. I love that there's one little line in there saying that the crossbow wielders will target spellcasters in the rear to try and disrupt spells, or like unarmored characters figuring that they're going to be the mages. Fascinating right there. And
Yeah.
then to top it all off, the other ogre and the other orcs, they, I guess, take some other passages and go around the long way, and they come and attack the PCs from behind. So again, amazing tactics. I love the way this all kind of works out. I've had a lot of fun with this encounter the couple times I've run players through it. Definitely stands up to the modern terms, and I think if you're looking for that, how do I do tactics, or how do I use the environment to kind of enhance my encounters, this is a great encounter to use this.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, I probably should have had this one higher than 4, but I didn't. So but anyway, this is my number 4, the
Yeah.
orc and ogre outpost.
Love the tactics in that area. I love the importance placed upon the weapons used. And
Yes.
and I think, and it's just something I take as a lesson to myself when designing. And I think Goodman Games, we put out products that have really nailed the tactics in a lot of, we definitely have writers who love to, put those tactics in where they're needed. So, but you can never have too much of that. It's just, it's so cool to me to see this in a book of this time, and, use that kind of knowledge of the weapons, and not just have a weapon be a throwaway thing, as opposed to, they've got an axe instead of a spear. No, in this, it shows you these creatures, they know what they're using, they know how to use it, they know how to position themselves or rank themselves in groups and use it. And it sets it up into like a sort of waved encounter, as opposed to just blitzing the characters with a whole bunch of creatures at once. So I think it's really interesting. Great encounter.
Yes.
So moving on to my number 4. My number 4 is, well, here's our first crossover, Area 8, the cemetery.
Okay.
For all the reasons you described, I'm a sucker for a table of effects. You can never go wrong there.
Never.
I love the little subtle hints in the areas around this to that there's something off in this room because the orcs are avoiding it and afraid of it and that sort of thing. I love the reward in the passage down. It's a great, and it could be looked at as a sort of one-off area in a way, but I think it's just a really evocative area. It's fun.
Yes.
Nothing that's necessarily dangerous as long as the characters don't go over the top. But still, just I've brought characters, I've run them through this, players through this room and had them run on the table and get these different effects. And it's a lot of fun for the DM, I think, and the players. So great room. So that's my number 4 is the cemetery.
All right. Excellent. Yeah, I agree with you. Yes, I'm sure there's gonna be more crossovers.
Crossover number 1. Bing.
Yes, and I think this might be crossover number 2 coming up here,
Okay. Oh boy.
possibly. So my number 3 is obviously it's in the title of the module, folks. The slave pits of the Undercity. The slave pits encounter is a really really cool encounter. And we can pull up the picture of the slave pits. That would be awesome. But yes, so imagine a room with no floor, essentially. The floor is a bunch of 10-foot pits, if you will, and there's a bunch of crossbeam barbs, and it's set like a grid. And there's no doors to the cells because you just put them in from the top. You put the pieces, there's trap doors covering the top. And then there's a nearby room with a bunch of levers in it where there's an aspis that can actually control the trap doors. And then of course you get to this room, you see all the slaves down in the pit. You're like, oh wow. And you can see there's basically some balance beams you could walk across. And of course, hiding behind 2 pillars, we have 2 aspis drones, armed with swords. And again, these guys have 6 legs, so they walk on 2 legs, and then they can wield 4 swords, or they could wield 2 swords and 2 shields, which is kind of cool. And they just balance on out and they attack you. There's chances that you can get hit and you can fall into one of the pits. The slaves can't help you because they're 10 feet down. Obviously, there's falling damage. The guy in the control room is opening and closing the trapdoors to help out the other aspices, but obviously to hinder the PCs. A lot going on. This is one of those encounters that I think I probably ran it 35 years ago, 37 years ago. I still remember the way that encounter went, and I'm sure my players would remember it as well because it's just so cool. It's so evocative. I mean,
Yeah.
and it's just fascinating. It inspired me. I put a very similar thing in Castle White Rock when I was designing that. And to top it all off, for the homage to our show, Talking TSR, the Aspis drone in the control room is carrying a pearl of wisdom. So it's like, it's like, how about that? So it's almost too perfect. So that is my number 3, the actual slave pits.
Nice. Super evocative. I love the fact that they put that illustration in there because it speaks 1,000 words for the DM, if not the players, about what the room's like. I love the aspis balancing on the kind of beams in between. I love the whole place. I think it's super cool. Can't agree more. I always kind of wondered how the hell they got the prisoners out of there. If there was something to raise them up or how they hauled them back up out of there. But yeah, I love it. I think it's just such a cool, you can't name special areas in this module, I think, without naming that, right?
Yeah.
All right, so where are we? Number 3. My number 3 is area 16, the main courtyard. Now, this is a sort of, people can kind of stumble into this area depending on which way they enter fairly rapidly. And this is another, kind of like the ogre room, this is another area that's got a lot of humanoids, and they've got a sort of wagon set up as a makeshift, almost like a flamethrower kind of device. And yet, Cook is very careful to say that the players can't necessarily grab this thing and wheel it through the dungeon committing wanton destruction, that it's something that takes a little training and a certain type of fuel and this and that. So, there's limits put on it for character use. But a lot of fun, a great big room where, again, a lot of tactics going on, crazy makeshift weapon, the places where humanoids can take cover, and there can be a lot of missile fire, and it's a fairly large room for this dungeon. Most of the areas in this dungeon aren't that big, and this room is a decent size. So it really breaks up the dungeon before you get to the more claustrophobic stuff down below. So for all those reasons, I like it. I think I've had some really fun encounters in this area. So that's my number 3, right in the middle there. Number 16, the main court.
Right. Nice. Okay. Excellent choice. My number 2 is area 12 on the upper floor, because I think I had area 12 on the lower floor also. This is the false slaver lair. So this was cool in the fact that, again, in the tournament module, it's assumed that you're going to go through the back entrance through the secret door and go in. But for the campaign version, they say that the PCs are certainly welcome to stake out the joint for a
Mhm.
day or two and kind of get the lay of the land and figure out some of those other entrances and everything. And they could actually disguise themselves as slavers
Mhm.
and actually try and go in through the front door. And the slavers have thought about that.
Mm.
And they actually will test if they're not familiar with the slavers that come to the front door, or I don't know if there's a password or something. They'll actually bring them to the false slaver lair, and you will go in, and there's a whole bunch of slaves that are all manacled together. There's like 20 of them, but they're not slaves. Their manacles are fake. They have weapons underneath, and at the drop of a hat, they can drop those manacles and draw the swords, and then they're supported. There's like two half-orc assassins nearby, and there's also a fighter cleric nearby. And the fighter cleric can lay down, spells, defensive spells, while the 20 mob the PCs. And they go into a little bit of detail about how if they try to do this, there's a whole process, a whole procedure that the
Mhm.
slavers go through to kind of vet a new buyer out and everything. And the players probably don't know any of this stuff, so they're probably going to go in and they're going to get themselves into a pretty big fight.
Mhm.
Even though the combatants are not particularly powerful, the fact that there's 20 of them and then supported by two assassins, and he's actually even careful to say that they don't use the assassin ability because that would probably be too overbalanced. They
Yeah.
just use sneak attacks.
Mhm.
So that is my number two, the false slaver lair. Assuming that your players try to outsmart you and try to
Mhm.
go in the front door.
And that did not make my list, but it was, I will tell you, it was a very near miss. That was
Okay.
definitely, yeah, that was definitely on the short list.
Yeah. We might have less crossover than you think
I
then.
don't know, we'll see. And I like this area because of the utility of it, because let's face it, there are situations where the players could disguise themselves as agents of evil.
Mhm.
And if there wasn't a room like that, there's a chance they could really throw off, like especially an inexperienced DM, and really throw a kind of
Yeah.
big curveball at the DM by approaching it in that sort of way. So to have that room in there, that sort of vetting area is so cool, because even if the players come in and think they're going to do this certain approach, there's the module has an answer for it. So yeah, I think it's a cool area, and it shows a lot of forethought on the part of the opponents. So it's, you got thinking monsters in this module. The villains are using their brains, which I love.
Yes.
So my number two, another crossover,
Oh, it is.
area 18, the slave pits.
Okay.
That made my number two, just because it's so eponymous. It's so evocative of the module. Like I said, I love that graphic of them, the aspis up on top of the pits, and the idea of the fighting up there. And it's just a very cool. It sticks with me. It's when I think of this module, I think of that picture. It's one of the first things that
Same here. Yep.
comes right into my head. So for that alone, it sums up this module in one encounter for me. So that is my number two. Maybe I should have made it number one, but that's my number two. That the slave pits.
All right. So we got two
Two
crossovers then.
crossovers and counting
Yes.
out of five.
Yep. All
One
right.
left to go.
Yep. So my number one, and this probably will not be a surprise. This is area 21 of the lower level, the Slave Lord Den. Now, the first thing right out of the gate, I will say, not the strongest and not the most evocative slave lord that we're going to run into during this whole series. If anything, this slave lord in this module is definitely a throwaway. He's a seventh level thief, and like, I don't even know if he has a name actually. But nothing spectacular about him, and literally he's just the boss to kind of overfight. And again, you can get right to him and overcome him pretty quickly, and you're not probably going to even miss anything in that. But really cool room of the setup. The room is circular. It's like kind of like an island in the middle. There's like a moat around it with sewage, and then he's on an alcove at the far end sitting at a table, and there's a bunch of crates over there. And then along on the other side of the moat, there's a ledge, and he's got 10 orc crossbowmen, and they stand, and there's bridges that go over. There's several bridges that go over to the alcove and go over to the ledge. And all the orcs are instructed to defend the bridges, use their crossbows, and then the slave lord has 5 giant weasel pets, and
Mm.
they're trained to attack when he commands them, and they can easily jump over. It says right in the module they can just jump right over the moat, and they can attack. So while the PCs are dealing with the giant weasels, you've got a thief in the literally in the shadows, and he actually sneaks behind the crates and he sips a potion of invisibility. And this probably broke potions of invisibility for all time moving forward. And the fact that Cook let him sip 1/8 of the potion of invisibility and basically use the potion 8 times. And of course, when you do that, your players are going to abuse that.
Yeah.
They're probably still trying to abuse that in this day. I think I had, when I was running Crypto Devilish, I think I had somebody trying to do the same thing. And I was like, so 40 years later, they're still trying to break that rule. Anyway, and another cool part is there was a staircase leading down in this room if you don't go in from the back, and that staircase was trapped. And that you touch the door, and if you don't disable it or don't do whatever you have to do with the door, the stairs turns into a slide and you get dumped down into that room and you lose initiative and you're prone. So that's a bad day. Again, love the encounter because of the tactics, love the encounter because there's a lot going on. I wish the slave lord was more memorable. I wish he or she was just a little bit more, something more there, something more evocative, something cooler. But outside of that, I love the encounter. So
I agree. I agree on every point. The slave lord needs some more personality. I did not put this encounter. This was actually my honorable mention. I did not put it just because I tried to leave the boss counter off. So
yeah,
I toyed with putting it on there anyway because I love the trick staircase, the way that works with this encounter. I love slide traps anyway. And the fact that this sort of, you have this trick staircase that can collapse and that literally scoot the characters right into the main boss room is wonderful. I think that's a great memorable moment. And then, like you said, the actual fight has potential for real interesting tactics. But like you said, they need to do something with that boss just to, it comes off a little too much like the token magic user, the token sorcerer, or whatever you're going to kind of throw in there, just a guy with some levels and spells needs a little something. But yeah, good room. And I love the way it looks on the map. Again, it's just great reminder for anybody who's doing, designing your own dungeons instead of just going with that square room, look at rooms like this and think about, just cool design, because just when you start mapping that out on the table or drawing it on, for your players, it'll instantly, get their interest level up a little more. So it's very cool. So yeah, that was my honorable mention for what it's worth. So semi crossover. So that was your number one. All right.
Yes.
So my number one, and this is as usual, like kind of a funky number one here that, Chris is going to probably read this and say, that's your number one. Just for sake of simplicity, but devilishness, my number one is area 4, the treacherous floor. And I think we have a picture of that. It's like a plank encounter picture. And
what were you thinking, Rick?
Yeah, I know.
No.
Right? But I love things like this because, again, a great picture, something you can just tear out of the book kind of and show the, here you go, and show your players.
So now you're tearing your books apart.
I know. Now I'm tearing my book. I'm just tearing
this
it out
is going
there.
The wrong way, folks. It's getting sacrilegious now.
At least my players, I can tell you, as soon as I described that and showed them a picture like that, if that doesn't scream trap to them, I don't know. They're just going to give me that look that they give me, that, what are you doing to us, Rick, kind of thing. Because I love it, because it presents hard choices, because you're told there's this sort of creaky center path. There's a crumbling wall on the one side. There's a wall that's a little sturdier, which actually turns out to be very unsafe on the other side. So you're given like kind of a 3-way choice of how to get across this room. No bad guys, just a simple navigation kind of puzzle. But it's cool. And again, it's probably the second picture after the slave pits that when I think of this module, I think of that encounter in that picture, because I've had so much fun with that over the years. I can tell you from experience that running it, you'd be surprised you can get out of that one little stupid room with a plank. So that's my number one, is the area 4, the treacherous floor.
I thought about that one, but yeah, no, there was just not cool. Maybe if we had some orcs up on the top of the wall or something, shooting crossbows or something, or swinging or something like that, swinging on ropes or something. would have I think that was the dilemma encounter, I think, for
Yeah.
that round, where that, it's not really or it might have been the trick. I'm not sure if it was the trick or the dilemma.
Hmm.
But yeah, basically it was the bad things can happen, or
Yeah.
you can kind of get around this without anything really bad happening.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, it's a cool encounter. I'm not sure I would have put it one, but that's fun. I see a need for it to be on the list though.
Yeah,
So
I know you like your counters deep.
I do, I
This
do.
one, I think just because of its brevity, because of its simplicity, its devious simplicity, somehow it weaseled its way up to the number one position. And like I said, now when I'm looking at my list, I don't know that and the slave lords, the slave pits, I'm kind of doing this, but
Yeah,
love them both.
yeah.
So,
Well,
again, both are very evocative for me of this adventure. Those are the encounters I think of when I think of this book. So,
the next list that we do, I'm gonna specifically get. I'm gonna go brevity. It's gonna be there's 10 Sturges in this room, and there's a 50 GP gem, and I'm gonna
and
pick
that's
that one.
nothing
I'm gonna
else.
be, yep, and that's it. And there's nothing else. No reload text, no nothing,
Yeah.
and just no tactics. It's just they're
We'll
hanging on the
banish
wall.
those crossovers.
Yeah. So my honorable mention was another crossover, and that was Area 16, the main courtyard, the
Huh.
makeshift flamethrower. It's funny. I often think of the flamethrower. I think of the slave pits encounter, and I think of the flamethrower actually.
Huh.
The flamethrower encounter. I actually thought that was going to be in my top five. I was like,
Mhm.
up, that's going to be in my top five. And then I remember when I reviewed it, I was like, wow, it wasn't as interesting as I thought it was.
Mhm.
And but I still had to mention it because I still remembered it and enjoyed it and everything.
Mhm.
But again, I do love the flamethrower side of it, and the fact that Dave Cook actually puts right in there that the PCs cannot use it and maneuver it, and even I think, and if you cast like a fire-based spell, you could actually end up blowing the whole thing up. So I thought that was really kind of cool. But yeah. So I think I think that's why ultimately I put it on as my honorable mention. So
Nice.
excellent. So that was cool. So that's it. That's our top five lists
All right.
for A1 Dungeon Module A1, the Slave Pits of the Undercity. So tell us give us some wrap up stuff, Rick. What's going on? When's our
Sure.
next show?
Sure. Well, our next show is coming to you again on Sunday, October 3rd at 8 p.m.
A big
And we're
shock
going to,
what the topic's going to be, folks. Big
oh,
shock.
well, yeah. Take a guess, folks. Any comments? Well, we're going to take the simple route, while the momentum is flowing and go right into A2, a Secret of the Slaver's Stockade, which is another
Nope. That's
great
A4.
underappreciated gem, I think. So yeah, we're just going to continue on. At least we may not do all four of the slavers in a row, but we're our next episode going to go right into the next one. And I'm looking forward to that one. There's so many encounters in that. I don't even know where to start. So
Yeah, I'm actually looking forward to the review of that one because back in the day, that it still might be my least favorite.
mm,
But I have come to appreciate it more as time has gone on, and I have a feeling when I do my review for it, I'm gonna actually like it a lot. So
interesting.
yeah,
See,
yeah. But it
that's
used to
not
be
my least favorite.
I used to
Wow.
not like that module at
Oh,
all.
that's
Again,
funny.
I thought it was too big. I thought there wasn't enough dungeon. It was too
Yeah,
much upper part. And yeah, but anyway, we'll get into it.
a lot
But yeah,
going
it
on.
used to be my least favorite. But I'm looking
Wow.
forward to that discussion because I really wanna dive into that, and I want to
Yeah,
really take a good close look at it. But yes, I do remember there is a ton of encounters, and
yeah,
they're not as meaty, and there's not as many tactics, and it's
yeah,
more back to some of the it's more Caves of Chaos
yeah,
style, kind of
yeah,
where
definitely.
you're gonna have a lot of rooms where that
Mhm.
we'll have to take a look at that. We'll still do a top five list, but that might be a
Yeah,
little bit
we'll have to
trickier.
see how we do that one. But anyway, that is on the roster, folks, for October 3rd at 8 p.m. And again, if you enjoyed this show, or whether you're watching us on Twitch or you catch us later on YouTube, please give us a follow, give us a like. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, ring that bell, and keep the comments coming. We love to hear what you have to say about the show. We've already taken hints from suggestions you've given us. Certainly, books you want to see covered. I always say this, but it's true. Tell us what you want us to talk about, and we'll try to move those adventures to the top of our queue and go through them. And thank you as always for watching. So I think now we're going to turn to our pearls of wisdom, right, Chris?
Yes, Pearl of Wisdom time, and go first so I don't
Oh
steal
boy.
yours.
Sure. I don't think we're going to cross over here.
Okay.
I'm going to actually kind of riff on what you were discussing as far as the maps of this particular module, as far as the tournament versus the regular version. And if you recall, you had black and white maps where it looked like they just sharpied out a whole bunch of areas and cut it down to the good stuff. And to me, as a DM, I think there's a nature, especially now that we think of ecology and we think of realism. I think to a certain point in our dungeons, it's easy to put unnecessary rooms in there. And I find myself, even as a DM, sometimes I put in a whole bunch of these living quarters and these sort of rooms. And then I almost are disappointed when the players go one direction instead of another, because I want them to get to the fun stuff, the really cool encounters that I've designed. And it's a reminder to me, looking at these black and white maps, that it's okay to cull out some of that and get down to the fun stuff. Don't bury the fun. Basically strip away some of that unnecessary stuff, especially if you're not writing for publication, if you're writing just for your own group or your own enjoyment. Pull away some of the mundane and get to the good stuff. Kind of delineate your dungeons down where every room is fun, where every room is memorable. Try to approach it in that sort of way, because instead of just having another orc barrack encounter or something, you can really do something like these slave pits where you give the characters and the players something memorable. So that's my pearl of wisdom.
Okay. Excellent one. I like that one. I like that a lot. So my pearl of wisdom is a little bit inspired with the current project I've been working on recently, which is Dark Tower. And but this module kind of fits into that too, and that's the more than one way in to the dungeon. Again, we've talked about this before, give your players options. There shouldn't just be one way into the dungeon. Caves of Chaos, I think, are beloved because there's 12 some odd caves or whatever, and you can literally go into any of them. You're going to be in deep trouble if you go into the wrong one. But there's options there. It's not there's one cave and you go in and then you're going to go through the encounters in a very predictable way. And we see this. You can go through the front door and disguise yourself as slavers. You can go through the back door, the secret door. There was a couple different ways you can get down into the dungeon. That is the ultimate. You're giving your players. Now you do run into what you touched in, and sometimes they're going to go the direction you don't necessarily want them to go to, and they might miss the fun stuff. But there's nothing more special than making the players think that they are the ones that are deciding, even though you have only 10 encounters designed.
Yeah.
But them not knowing what the order is and thinking there's 100 because they don't know how many you designed is very powerful, and definitely utilize that. Think about different ways in and out of your dungeons, and moving from level to level, and think about that dungeon ecology when you're taking that into place too. There could be more than one way in and out. So so that's my pearl of wisdom for this week. So we thank you, everybody. And once again, thank you guys for spending some of your Sunday night with us, with a bunch of old guys talking about a book that was published 40 years ago, almost like it's we're sitting around a bar at Gen Con, on a Saturday night or a Sunday night after the con. We do appreciate you guys and everything. And we will see you guys in 3 weeks. Before you know it, we're going to be here. So, all right, take care, everybody, and have a great night.
Bye, folks. Good night.